Today we're going to rebuild a starter for a Honda 4Trax 300. The majority of the time when a starter doesn't work, it's usually the brushes. And I've got the starter removed here, which I did in a different video. Today I'm going to show you how to take this apart and replace the brushes in it. And you can purchase the brushes from a dealer or off eBay for around $15 or maybe less, versus purchasing the whole new starter or rebuilt starter for anywhere from $45 was about the best price I could find, up to about $150 from the dealership. So watch as we take this apart and replace the brushes. We'll start off by removing these bolts, 2 bolts on the top after we've got this secured in a vise. These are 7mm. Before you take any of the body apart, you can see I've made marks to align my cap with my body, and over here my body with the bottom part of the cap, so that when we put this back together, the bolts will be aligned properly. We take out these bolts. You'll notice that there's some keepers on here that are flat on one side. They go flat side against the body when you put it back together. We can then take off the top cap, and there is a O-ring and what I call a castle nut or castle washer. It goes into this cap. Set those aside. At this point you can either take the body off or you can take the stator out, or both. I'm going to take them both out together. And there is the whole piece. There's a couple of washers on the bottom. We have to make sure we don't lose those. Set those aside. And this can be taken out of the body, but it's got a strong magnetic field, so you'll have to pull it sharply. The final part here, take off this O-ring or washer, and in order to get this out, I have to remove this nut and allow that to come up out of there. Now you can see inside here there's quite a bit of dirt and debris, a lot of broken material from the brushes. I'm going to lay down a paper towel. We'll tap all that debris out. Okay, this is what the brushes look like. They're small carbon surfaces that hook up to the the positive, and you can see this one has some spring left to it, and there's some surface area. This one, the spring is all gone and there's nothing left, so this is not rubbing against the starter, the stator, like it's supposed to. So we're going to have to replace the brushes. We're going to take a 10mm box end wrench and loosen up this nut. Take this nut off and make sure you make note of what direction these brushes are facing. We want to put the new brushes in the same way. Also make sure that you get all of these washers on the right way, because there's an insulating washer on here that keeps this from grounding against the body. One thing I always do when taking a part apart is I'll use my iPhone or any kind of phone, take a picture of how this thing is assembled, so that if some of my parts fall or whatever, I can take a picture and see how I put them back together. Right here, there's a series of washers that have to be put back on in the right order, because some of these washers are insulators to keep the body from getting the positive charge against the grounded body. So I'm going to take this nut off, all 3 washers. I'm going to set them down and take a picture of them. Just to be safe, I'm going to take a picture of this assembly also, in case it doesn't get put back together the right way. I've got something to refer to. Now that the nuts are off, you can push this bolt out. You'll notice that there's a rubber washer on the inside also, and a plastic piece. It's very important to get these right so that the positive charge on here doesn't come in contact with the ground of this body. I got this part off eBay. It just came in. I'm going to open it up. And you can see it's just like the one that came out. You want to make sure that everything looks similar. Make sure that the tabs here line up properly, because they're going to go in this body and we don't want this spinning. And so we'll take the nuts off here and get ready to insert this back in the way the old one came out. Okay, we've got the new part here. We have to make sure that the black insulator is on here. I've even removed the black O-ring. We're going to insert the bolt through the hole. Make sure we've got it lined up and that the black insulator is flush. And once that's pushed through as far as it can go, we're going to put the black O-ring on, shove it all the way up to the end, and put it inside the hole there. That will seal this from any water getting inside of there. Next, we put on our two insulator washers and the first nut. We'll tighten that whole thing down with the 10mm wrench. Then we're going to put on another insulator and a washer, and then put on the final nut. But we don't need to tighten this one down because we have to hook it to the terminal that's on the four-wheeler in order to hook the battery back up. Now you can see that these brushes are much longer than the brushes that came out. They've got the springs behind them that keep them pushed against the rotor. So we're going to turn these face down, and we're going to make sure that our tabs line up with the tabs inside this housing. So this tab here is going to go inside a groove right there, and you might have to force it just a little because of our connecting wire there. And there's the brushes installed. Next, we want to take those 4 washers that were on the end of our rotor, put them back on the end of the rotor. We're going to insert this back into the body while we get these brushes out of the way. This can be a little tricky, and you have to make sure that you don't lose the washers. Now we're going to use a small flat blade screwdriver, push back the spring on these brushes so that the rotator can go down and clear the brushes, and then push it straight down into the hole. There we go. Make sure that it turns freely and that there's a clearance between here and the base. If there's no clearance, that will rub on there, and it means that you've forgotten one of the washers that was originally in there. Now we need to put a washer, remember the washer here, when we put the body back on. And I'm going to look for the marks that I made on here before we started. There's my mark. I'm going to put the washer on here. Push this down over the body. Be careful because this is magnetic and it's going to want to pull to the side. And we push that down until it's all the way down, and then we line up our marks. And you can see the marks are lined up right there. We'll put our Castle washer back on the top. We have a black O-ring that needs to go on here. And then we put our end cap back on. And it may not line up with that Castle washer. Oh, it lined up perfectly. Now we spin this around until we find our mark. There it is. It's a little arrow. And I line it up with this arrow. And it doesn't feel like it's all the way down. So I'm going to turn the nut a little bit. And there it went down all the way. Now if everything's lined up perfectly, I can put my original bolts back in. They'll drop all the way down. Make sure that the flat side of the washer is against the body. Start turning the bolt. And it is threading down in there, so we've got that aligned. Put in the next bolt, spin that bolt, and it's going in, so that's aligned. I'm going to use my battery operated tool to gently and slowly bring this all the way down. And I'm turning the body slightly to make sure that it all goes down and fits properly. Now we use our ratchet. We tighten this by hand. Keep them even. Okay, and that's all there is to replacing the brushes in the starter. Once you replace those brushes and everything's turning well, this should be just like new.